My name is Valerie, I am 72 years old, and my occupation is a retired bakery owner. For decades, I poured my sweat and tears into building my dream home, believing it would be my safe sanctuary forever. I never imagined that the very son I sacrificed everything for was quietly counting down the days until he could lock me away in a facility and steal it all right out from under me. I thought I was just a frail, clueless old woman who would quietly surrender her independence without a fight. But tomorrow morning, when he tries to unlock my front door and finds a completely different family standing in the foyer, he is going to learn exactly what happens when you mistake a mother's love for weakness. For 35 years, I woke up long before dawn. I spent my days covered in flour, kneading dough and standing over hot ovens, so my only son, Jamal, would never want for a single thing in this world. I built my beautiful suburban home with my own two hands and endless personal sacrifices. My best friends, Jacqueline and Maxine, always warned me that I gave that boy far too much. They told me I was spoiling him, but a mother's love is often blind to the faults of her child. I truly thought Jamal and I shared an unbreakable bond, especially after his father passed away. I believed my son was my rock, the one person who would stand by me as my hair turned grey. I gave him the best education, the best clothes, and a debt-free start to his adult life, thinking I was securing a foundation of mutual love and respect. That precious illusion shattered into a million pieces on the weekend of my 72nd birthday. I was upstairs putting away fresh laundry when I overheard a conversation coming from the hallway below that made my blood run absolutely cold. Jamal was standing there whispering with his wife Chloe, a white American woman who had always looked at my house as if she were measuring the windows for her own custom drapes. I paused at the top of the stairs, expecting to hear them planning a surprise birthday dinner or discussing a thoughtful gift. Instead, I heard the chilling details of my own demise. They were actively plotting to declare me legally incompetent. Chloe was excitedly talking about locking me away in a rundown state facility so they could quickly cash in on my home and erase my existence from their daily lives. I stood there frozen with my hands trembling against the banister. The son I had nurtured and protected was eagerly agreeing to strip away my dignity just to pay for his lavish lifestyle. For decades, I dedicated my entire existence to ensuring Jamal had every advantage I never did. I wanted him to start his adult life 10 steps ahead of where I began. When he graduated from college, he walked across that stage without a single dime of student loan debt hanging over his head. I paid for it all with the flour on my hands, the long nights at the bakery, and the constant ache in my back. When he needed a down payment for his first car, I handed him the check with a proud smile. Even after I officially closed the bakery, retired, and hung up my apron, I continued to quietly slip him cash. I knew he was struggling to keep up with the lavish lifestyle his wife Chloe constantly demanded. She had an expensive taste for luxury vacations, fine dining, and designer handbags. And I just wanted my son to have peace in his marriage. So I subsidized their lives from the shadows, dipping into my own funds to make sure they stayed afloat. Meanwhile, I lived a very quiet and modest life. My greatest joy was simply waking up early to sip my hot black coffee on the back porch and spend my afternoons tending to my tomato and rose garden. I drove a 10-year-old sedan and always bought my clothes from the clearance racks. But that was a conscious choice. What Jamal and Chloe did not know was that my bakery had been incredibly successful. I had invested my profits very wisely over 35 years, building a substantial and highly lucrative retirement portfolio. I deliberately hid the true extent of my savings from them. I lived discreetly because I always believed from the bottom of my heart that visible wealth attracts nothing but vultures and problems. I wanted Jamal to work hard and build his own legacy, not wait around for a handout from his mother. I thought I was protecting him from entitlement and greed. I thought my modesty would keep our family grounded in the values of hard work and respect. I never realized that my silence was actually setting the stage for the ultimate betrayal. I was their invisible safety net, keeping them comfortable, while they secretly looked down on the very woman who was secretly paying their way. The disrespect began subtly at first, just tiny little jabs that I tried to brush off to keep the peace. Chloe would walk into my home and make snide, condescending comments about my age. She would watch me walk up the front steps and loudly suggest that I was getting far too frail to manage a house with stairs. She would say it with a fake, sweet voice, making it sound like she cared when I could clearly see the calculation in her eyes. Then came the visits from her sister Ashley, a white American woman who marched into my home with an unbearable sense of entitlement. Ashley would come over just to snoop around my kitchen and living room. I would catch her opening my cabinets, inspecting my crystal, and loudly appraising the value of my vintage mid-century furniture. She would touch my solid mahogany dining table and tell Chloe how much it would fetch at an estate auction right in front of my face. It was as if I was already dead, and they were just taking inventory of the spoils. They started treating me like a ghost in my own home. When Jamal and Chloe came over for Sunday dinners, they would talk completely over me, ignoring my questions and dismissing my opinions as if I was a confused child who could not follow an adult conversation. I would sit at the head of the table I bought with my own hard-earned money and feel entirely invisible. They began moving my belongings without asking, rearranging my living room decor and throwing away my mail because they claimed it was just clutter. I felt the air in my own house growing heavy and suffocating. The sanctuary I had built to raise my son was being invaded by people who saw my life as nothing more than a real estate opportunity. I tried to talk to Jamal about it, but he would just wave his hand and tell me I was being overly sensitive. The conflict escalated to a terrifying level when my own son, Jamal, actually began gaslighting me. Items in my house started disappearing or moving to strange places. I would leave my house keys on the kitchen counter exactly where I had placed them for 30 years. But hours later, I would find them deliberately hidden under a pile of magazines in the guest room. Jamal would look at me with a heavy, dramatic sigh and claim I was rapidly losing my memory. He started casually bringing up the idea of a nursing home under the guise of loving concern. He would hold my hand and tell me he was just worried about my safety, trying to manipulate me into willingly signing away my legal and financial rights. He brought over thick stacks of complex legal documents, claiming they were just standard emergency contact forms, and urged me to sign them quickly without reading. I could see the greedy impatience burning right behind his eyes. They were treating me like a heavy burden, an inconvenient obstacle standing between them and a comfortable, luxurious life that was going to be financed entirely by my life's work. They genuinely thought they could break my mind and spirit, making me doubt my own sanity, so I would surrender everything I owned. They wanted me locked away and forgotten, but my mind was as sharp as a tack, and I saw exactly the monster my son was becoming. One quiet Tuesday afternoon, the house was completely still. Jamal and Chloe had gone out to a trendy brunch spot downtown, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the lingering scent of Chloe's overly sweet floral perfume. I was wiping down the dining room table, my hands moving in the familiar, soothing circles they had made for over 30 decades. That was when I noticed a thick manila folder tucked slightly under a stack of decorative home magazines. Jamal was usually very protective of his personal paperwork, always rushing to shove his mail into his leather briefcase the moment he walked through the door. But in their excited rush to enjoy their bottomless mimosas, they had made a sloppy, arrogant mistake. I dried my hands on my apron and pulled the folder out, expecting to find some unpaid utility bills or overdue credit card statements. Instead, what I pulled from that envelope made the air catch in my throat and sent a freezing chill straight down to my bones. It was a glossy brochure for the Oak Creek Care Center. Everyone in our county knew about the terrible reputation of Oak Creek. It was a notoriously neglected state-run facility, A dismal place where the elderly were parked in dark, lonely hallways and simply forgotten, amidst the overwhelming smell of strong bleach and profound despair. My hands began to shake violently as I pulled out the rest of the hidden contents. Beneath the brochure was a thick stack of formal legal documents with the words, "Durable Power of Attorney," stamped across the top in bold black letters. The pages were heavily highlighted with bright yellow marker, indicating exactly where I needed to sign my name, and where a notary would eventually stamp their official seal. But the absolute most horrifying part of this discovery was not the cold legal jargon itself. It was the undeniable fact that they had already taken the liberty of filling out my personal information. My full legal name, my date of birth, my confidential social security number, and the exact deed details of my beloved home were all typed out neatly on the dotted lines. I stood there in the deafening silence of my dining room, staring at the dark ink on those pages. My chest heaved heavily as I struggled to pull oxygen into my suddenly burning lungs. I realized instantly that this was not just a passing thought or a fleeting moment of misplaced concern for an aging mother. This was a carefully orchestrated, deeply malicious conspiracy. They had researched the worst possible facility, they had consulted with someone to acquire the legal forms, and they had meticulously mapped out the exact legal route required to strip me of my independence. They wanted to declare me fully incompetent, take absolute control of my finances, and lock me away in a miserable institution so they could freely claim the beautiful home I had built with my own sweat. A wave of profound grief washed over me, but it was quickly swallowed by a fierce protective instinct. I carefully placed the documents exactly where I found them, sliding the folder back into its hiding spot. My very first natural instinct was to scream at the top of my lungs. I desperately wanted to wait by the front door until they returned and demand to know exactly how my own flesh and blood could possibly plot something so incredibly wicked. I wanted to throw that manila folder directly in Jamal's face and ask him where his soul had gone. But I quickly realized that an emotional, dramatic confrontations was exactly what those two vultures wanted. If I lost my temper, raised my voice, or acted hysterical in any way, it would only give them the perfect ammunition they needed to prove to a judge that I was emotionally unstable and rapidly losing my grip on reality. Instead of screaming, I chose the much harder path of silent armament. I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that I needed irrefutable, undeniable proof of their malicious intent before I could make my next move. The very next morning, while Jamal and Chloe were still fast asleep in the guest room, I quietly drove to a small electronics store a few towns over, just so I would not run the risk of running into anyone I knew. I paid cash and purchased a highly sensitive, discreet digital voice recorder. It was tiny, no bigger than a standard pack of chewing gum, but it possessed enough battery life and storage capacity to silently capture days of high-quality audio. When I returned home, I carefully slipped the small black device deep under the thick cushions of the living room sofa, placing it right in the exact spot where Jamal and Chloe always sat to drink their evening wine and openly complain about their days. With the hidden trap firmly set, I began the absolute hardest performance of my entire life. I deliberately leaned into the exact false narrative they were actively trying to build against me. I forced myself to continue playing the role of the docile, frail, and increasingly confused old woman they so desperately wanted me to be. When they came downstairs for breakfast, I would ask them the exact same questions twice with a blank stare. I would intentionally misplace my reading glasses and ask Jamal to help me search the kitchen. I would purposely walk with a slight, unsteady shuffle, firmly holding onto the edges of the heavy wooden furniture for balance. That evening, I even brought them a silver tray of hot tea and intentionally let my right hand tremble, so the porcelain cups rattled loudly against their saucers. Chloe looked at Jamal with a terribly smug, triumphant smirk that made my stomach completely turn over. She truly believed her cruel master plan was working flawlessly. They would take the tea, thank me with dripping condescension, and then dismiss me to my bedroom so they could have their privacy. I would walk slowly up the carpeted stairs, playing the tragic part perfectly. But inside my mind was incredibly sharp, calculating and furious. I knew that the moment I was out of earshot, they would begin to scheme. I lay wide awake in my bed, staring blankly at the ceiling, knowing that the little device hidden beneath them was silently capturing every single one of their poisonous words. I was weaponizing their own foolish underestimation of me, turning their supreme arrogance into the very rope they would eventually use to hang themselves. The following morning, as soon as Jamal and Chloe left the house for work, I hurried straight to the living room and pulled the voice recorder from the dark depths of the sofa. I sat down at my kitchen table, plugged in a pair of headphones, and pressed the play button with a trembling finger. Listening to that audio playback broke my heart. In a profound way I never thought possible. But it also fueled a righteous burning anger that completely erased any lingering maternal doubts I had about my son. Through the mild static, I heard the distinct clinking of their wine glasses, followed immediately by Chloe's shrill, piercing laughter. She was openly mocking my trembling hands from the night before, laughing cruelly about how remarkably easy it was going to be to convince a family court judge that I was entirely senile. Jamal, my own son, the boy I had rocked to sleep and sacrificed my entire youth for, chuckled right along with her as if it were a hilarious joke. He told her that my fake confusion was a massive blessing because it meant they would not have to fight me in a lengthy court battle. But then the conversation shifted dramatically, and the ugly, terrifying truth of their true motive was laid completely bare. They were not just greedy, they were incredibly desperate. Jamal admitted out loud that his credit cards were completely maxed out, and that aggressive debt collectors were actively threatening to garnish his wages. Chloe complained bitterly about her own massive secret debts and the high-interest loans she had taken out just to keep up appearances with her wealthy socialite friends. Then I heard a name that made my jaw clench tight. Ashley. Chloe gleefully announced that her sister Ashley had already tapped into her professional real estate network and secured a private cash buyer for my house. Ashley had confidently promised them a rapid off-market sale, the absolute minute the judge officially handed Jamal the power of attorney. They were completely drowning in severe financial ruin, and they selfishly saw my beautiful home as their only life raft. They coldly calculated the substantial equity I had built up over 35 years and divided it up right there on my sofa, deciding exactly how much would go to their mounting debts and how much they would freely spend on a luxury vacation to celebrate their new wealth. They spoke about me not as a mother who had deeply loved and provided for them, but as a walking, talking ATM that had simply become problematic and needed to be permanently discarded. In that kitchen with the bright morning sun pouring through the window, the very last remaining shred of my maternal blindness evaporated into thin air. I took off the headphones and wiped a single solitary tear from my cheek. I was completely done crying. I was done being the sacrificial lamb for a son who viewed my continued existence as an inconvenience. I was going to completely crush their plan and secure my own future. I sat at my kitchen table the next morning, staring at the cold black coffee in my mug and feeling a profound shift deep within my soul. I refused to let them destroy me. I refused to let the son I had birthed and the arrogant woman he married completely erase my legacy and strip me of my dignity. I knew I needed serious legal firepower to protect my life's work. I reached out to a woman I had met years ago at a small business seminar named Cassandra. She was a ruthless, highly respected real estate and asset protection attorney who had a fierce reputation for legally destroying anyone who tried to cross her clients. I sat in her pristine downtown office later that afternoon and laid out everything I had discovered, including the detailed audio recordings of their vile conversations. Cassandra listened to the tapes with a face made of absolute stone. She immediately pulled my financial records and property deeds to see exactly how far Jamal had gone behind my back. What we discovered in those documents made me physically sick to my stomach. Jamal had already forged my signature on several preliminary bank documents, attempting to secure a massive line of credit against the equity of my home. My own flesh and blood had spent hours practicing tracing my handwriting to commit federal financial fraud. Cassandra looked at me from across her large mahogany desk and asked exactly what I wanted to do. I told her I wanted to sever every single financial artery keeping his sinking ship afloat, acting swiftly and without a single ounce of mercy. I had Cassandra draft the official paperwork to cancel all the automatic financial transfers I had been silently sending to Jamal's accounts for the past 3 years. The thousands of dollars I had been secretly transferring each month to cover their luxury car leases, their high-end apartment rent, and Chloe's ridiculous designer credit card bills were instantly stopped. I felt a profound sense of liberation as the bank manager stamped the final cancellation forms. For years, I had been bleeding myself dry to fund the illusion of their success. I was the silent foundation holding up their arrogant lives, and I had just completely shattered that foundation. I knew it would only take a few short days for their checks to start bouncing and their angry creditors to start calling. But I did not care anymore. I walked out of that bank feeling 10 years younger and lighter than air. I had spent my entire life building a safety net for a boy who grew up to be a greedy monster. Now I was weaving a tight web that would catch him in his own deceit. I instructed Cassandra to freeze my retirement accounts and place them in a highly secured, ironclad trust that Jamal could never touch, even if he managed to bribe a corrupt judge. Every single legal loophole was tightly sealed. I was no longer a heartbroken mother, mourning the loss of a son. I was a fierce warrior protecting my castle. And I was fully preparing for a devastating war he had absolutely no idea he was fighting, with my finances locked down tight. The next crucial step was securing my greatest asset, which was my beautiful home. I could not risk Jamal and his greedy sister-in-law Ashley trying to force a sale through the court system before I was ready. I worked directly with Cassandra and a highly discreet private real estate broker to list my house on an exclusive off-market network. I needed someone who could move fast and pay in full without leaving a public paper trail that Ashley could easily stumble upon during her daily real estate snooping. Within a single week, the universe answered my prayers. A lovely out-of-state family relocating for work fell entirely in love with my property. They had been searching for a place with a warm soul, and they deeply appreciated every custom detail I had built into the kitchen and the garden over the decades. Most importantly, they were willing to pay entirely in cash and close the deal in exactly 10 days. I sat in Cassandra's quiet conference room and signed the heavy stack of closing documents, effectively transferring the deed over to the new owners. The substantial cash payment was wired directly into my newly secured trust account. In a matter of minutes, the house that Jamal thought was his guaranteed golden ticket legally belonged to complete strangers. My fortune was completely secure and out of his reach forever. But I still had to maintain the physical illusion that I was passively waiting for the end. While Jamal and Chloe were busy at their jobs, dreaming about how they were going to spend my money, I was orchestrating a massive secret relocation. I rented a secure climate-controlled storage unit on the other side of town. Every morning, the second their cars pulled out of the driveway, I sprang into action. I carefully wrapped my mother's vintage crystal, the delicate porcelain figurines, and the priceless family photo albums. I packed away the handmade quilts, the valuable silver sets, and the expensive jewelry I had accumulated over 35 years of running a successful bakery. I hired 2 discreet moving men who would arrive in an unmarked van to quietly transport my heavy antique furniture and precious belongings to the storage unit. to ensure Jamal and Chloe suspected absolutely nothing. I left empty cardboard boxes stacked neatly in the back of my closets. I kept out just enough cheap clothing and old kitchenware to make it look like I was still living my everyday life. When they came over for their fake evening visits to check on my supposedly deteriorating mental state, they saw exactly what they wanted to see. They saw a tired, frail old woman living in a house full of memories, completely oblivious to the fact that the real treasures were already gone. I even went as far as to buy cheap knockoff vases from the local thrift store to place on the dining room table, so they would not notice my expensive antiques were missing. The adrenaline pumping through my veins during those 10 days was incredibly intoxicating. Every piece of tape I secured and every box I shipped out was a silent victory against their wickedness. I was dismantling the very empire they thought they were inheriting right beneath their arrogant noses, and they were far too absorbed in their own vanity to see the walls coming down around them. The tension finally reached its ultimate boiling point on a warm Thursday evening, just 2 days before the new owners were scheduled to take full possession of the property. I was standing at the kitchen sink, slowly washing a coffee mug, when the front door suddenly swung open. Jamal marched into my kitchen, looking absolutely furious, with Chloe and her sister Ashley flanking him on either side like 2 vicious bodyguards. I could instantly tell that the financial shockwaves had finally hit them. His face was twisted in an ugly mixture of blind panic and ruthless aggression. He slammed a thick stack of legal documents down onto my clean granite countertop. It was the heavily highlighted power of attorney forms I had found earlier. Jamal looked at me with cold, dead eyes and issued his final cruel ultimatum. He aggressively demanded that I sign the papers immediately, handing over complete control of my finances, my medical decisions, and my property right then and there. He raised his voice and told me that my memory was rapidly failing and that I was becoming a severe danger to myself and the community. Ashley stood there with her arms tightly crossed, smirking and tapping her expensive manicured nails against her designer purse, while Chloe dramatically wiped away fake tears, claiming she could no longer bear the heavy emotional burden of watching me deteriorate. Jamal leaned in close, his voice dropping to a harsh, threatening whisper. He told me that if I refused to sign voluntarily, they already had a corrupt doctor ready to testify in family court the very next morning. They were fully prepared to legally declare me mentally incompetent, strip me of my human rights, and forcefully drag me into a locked psychiatric ward. I looked at the son I had carried in my womb, the boy I had sacrificed my entire youth to protect and elevate. There was absolutely no love left in his eyes, only a dark, consuming greed and desperate entitlement. I knew this was the exact moment I had to deliver the performance of a lifetime. I let my shoulders slump forward intentionally, making myself look incredibly small, broken, and defeated. I allowed my hands to tremble violently as I reached out and touched the edge of the legal documents. I looked up at Jamal with wide, fearful eyes and let a single tear roll slowly down my cheek. I told him in a weak, shaky voice that I was just so tired of fighting. I whispered that I knew my mind was slipping, and that I did not want to be a terrible burden on his beautiful marriage anymore. I agreed to everything they demanded. I told them I would not fight the court order and that I would willingly pack my bags for the state-run nursing home that coming weekend. The transformation in their posture was immediate and deeply nauseating. The aggressive tension completely drained from their bodies, replaced by an overwhelming sense of arrogant victory. Jamal let out a long, heavy sigh of relief, pretending to look like a burdened son who had finally found peace. Chloe stepped forward and actually had the audacity to wrap her arms around me in a tight, fake hug, whispering into my ear that I was making the right choice for the family. Ashley smiled triumphantly, shooting Chloe a knowing look that practically screamed they had hit the jackpot. They walked out of my kitchen that night, walking on air. convinced they had successfully conquered the foolish old woman and secured their luxurious future. They drove away completely unaware that they were blindly dancing directly into a devastating trap and that the ground beneath their feet had already been completely removed. Saturday morning arrived crisp and exceptionally bright. The kind of beautiful sunny day that felt almost poetic for a grand dramatic finale. I stood quietly inside the house, peering through the slight crack in the living room blinds. Right on schedule. Jamal and Chloe pulled into my driveway in a massive rented moving van. They stepped out of the vehicle looking incredibly smug, dressed casually like they were about to do some light weekend chores, rather than forcefully uproot a 72-year-old woman from her safe sanctuary. Chloe was already pointing eagerly at my vintage rose bushes, casually mentioning to Jamal how she wanted to rip them completely out and install a modern fire pit. I watched as Jamal strutted up the front pathway with an arrogant swagger, completely convinced he had finally won the ultimate prize. He pulled his copy of my house key from his pocket and confidently jammed it right into the front door lock. I held my breath as he twisted his wrist, but the key stubbornly refused to turn. He jiggled it aggressively, his frustration visibly mounting as he shoved his shoulder hard against the heavy oak door. The heavy deadbolts held perfectly firm because I had brought in a professional locksmith the night before. Chloe marched up the concrete steps behind him, whining loudly about how I was probably just terribly confused and had accidentally locked the security chain. Just as Jamal began aggressively pounding his heavy fist against the wood, a massive commercial moving truck rumbled down the quiet street and parked directly behind their rented van, completely blocking them in. Jamal and Chloe spun around in utter confusion as a lovely family of 4 stepped out of the lead vehicle. The father, a tall man with a friendly smile, walked straight up my driveway, holding a thick manila envelope. Jamal puffed out his chest, completely outraged, and loudly demanded to know what these absolute strangers were doing on his property. The father looked at Jamal with a mixture of polite pity and sheer confusion, then calmly pulled a certified legal deed from his envelope. He politely informed my son that this was no longer his property, explaining that his family had purchased the home entirely in cash earlier that week, and they were here to officially take possession. The absolute sheer panic that instantly washed over Jamal and Chloe's faces was something I will never, ever forget. Their perfectly crafted illusion of ultimate power was shattering right in front of them in broad daylight. That was the exact moment I chose to open the front door. I stepped out onto the porch, followed closely by Cassandra, my fierce real estate attorney. I did not look anything like the frail, confused old woman they thought they had so easily conquered. I stood incredibly tall, wearing a tailored navy blue suit, my hair perfectly styled, radiating a quiet, undeniable power I had not felt in several decades. Jamal stared at me with his mouth hanging wide open, completely paralyzed by the sudden, massive shift in reality. Before he could even formulate a single cohesive sentence, I walked right up to him and handed him a crisp, white envelope. I looked him dead in the eye and calmly told him it was a 30-day eviction notice for his luxury downtown apartment. I watched the blood drain entirely from his face as I revealed that I was the anonymous guarantor who had been secretly paying his exorbitant rent for the past 3 years. I told him those secret financial transfers were permanently cancelled, leaving him fully responsible for the massive, staggering debts he had recklessly accumulated. Chloe let out a dramatic, high-pitched shriek, insisting that I could not possibly do this terrible thing to my own flesh and blood. In response, I simply reached into my suit pocket, pulled out the digital voice recorder, and pressed play. I turned the volume all the way up, allowing the clear, damning audio of their vicious conspiracy to echo loudly across the front lawn for all the curious neighbors to hear. Their cruel laughter and greedy plans to lock me in a neglected state facility filled the morning air, leaving them absolutely nowhere to hide from the harsh truth. Chloe burst into panicked, hysterical tears as the dreadful reality of her total ruin finally set in. Cassandra stepped forward and coldly informed them both that she had already contacted the legal authorities regarding the preliminary bank documents Jamal had fraudulently forged, ensuring a thorough financial fraud investigation was currently underway. Stripped of my secret funding, their lavish, entitled lifestyle collapsed completely and instantly. They had tried so hard to bury me, but they had only succeeded in digging their own deep financial graves. I turned my back on them without shedding a single tear, handed the real house keys to the beautiful new family, and walked to the waiting black car Cassandra had arranged for me. I had secured my entire life savings, severed the toxic ties that were dragging me down, and finally chosen my own peace over their endless greed. With my fortunes safely locked in an ironclad trust, I grabbed my passport from my purse. I am no longer just a retired bakery owner confined to the suburbs. I am finally completely free to embark on a luxury tour of the top 10 most beautiful cities in the world, starting with the breathtaking natural wonders of China. For the very first time in my 72 years, my life belongs entirely to me. I learned the hard way that true love can never be bought. Family is defined by respect, not simply by blood. Please remember, it is never too late to stand up, set fierce boundaries, and completely reclaim your dignity. If my personal story resonated with you today, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories. Let me know in the comments exactly where you are watching from and what time it is there now. I absolutely love seeing how far these stories travel. Until next time, stay strong and always guard your peace.